Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special summer edition of the South Asia Initiative Lecture and Conversation Series. My name is Saiba Varma. I'm an associate professor in the anthropology department at UCSD, and we wanted to host this special event today because of everything that's been happening in India in the last few months. So, as you might have seen on the news, in early June 2026, protests in India erupted in response to a series of systemic crises facing India's youth, from unemployment rates that are soaring near 45% for those under 25, to repeated national examination leaks, which students across the country prepare for, sometimes for years, and often at great personal expense to them. Student mental health also has emerged as a huge issue. Several students committed suicide after taking the medical college exams and finding out that those results were not going to be tabulated because of the leaks, and a lack of general government accountability. An online satirical movement led by Gen Z, um, led by the Cockroach Janta Party, transformed into a massive protest across India's major cities, demanding structural change and the resignation of India's Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan. On Saturday, he resigned, securing the student movement a huge victory. To talk more about these historic protests and understand what comes next, I'm delighted to welcome Umesh Joshi. Umesh is an activist scholar with an MPhil in sociology from South Asia University. His thesis explores how Jantar Mantar, which is the site of the student protests in Delhi, became India's designated protest site, and what are the spatial regulation of dissent, what that reveals about democracy and the state under free market capitalism. So, welcome, Umesh. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us. Let me start by asking you, so for those who are not so familiar, haven't been following the protest in great detail as you have, can you just provide a little bit of context and outline the events that led up to the student movement?
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, Saiba. Thank you for having me over and excited to share whatever I've gathered since the beginning of this movement. Uh, I will begin by simply putting out there what basically was the reason on which all of this grew. There are certain uh, uh, political, economic, and social reasons, and one of them was the manner in which education, especially public education, has been systematically decimated over the years, in the past few decades, in the last 10 decades particularly. With the coming up of the national education policy, the NTA, and so on and so forth, different institutional structural changes and institutional changes were made, because of which um, there have been a lot of problems within the education sector. And in general, uh, uh, universities or education in general, education which was seen by the middle class as this possibility of an upward mobility. They saw education and investment in education as returns through which they could, families could be upwardly mobile, even middle class families, and they poured a lot of their savings in order to yield those benefits. It was almost like it's an insurance for them for the old age. So they would invest everything in education, and especially exams like the JEE, which is for entrance to IITs and NITs in India, which is the hubs of technology, uh, and then the NEET exams, which is for the medicals. Now, one is that these since these institutions came up, the new ones, the NTA and all, there have been several irregularities within how the exams are conducted, paper leaks, and so on and so forth. All of it, this is going on one side. This is one set of events that are occurring, and then you have unemployment rates going up. You have uh, gig economies being normalized. That degrees no longer mean anything in this country or much of the world, I think. So people are, fighting for employment. There's high levels of unemployment. So this event, you can say that it began basically on the 12th, when it was discovered that the national entrance examination test papers were the NEET papers were leaked on the. It was discovered that on the 12th of May that exam papers were leaked. The papers were circulating all over Telegram and so on and so. And on the 15th of May, the Chief Justice of India, while hearing a matter, calls the students, calls the youth as cockroaches. He refers to them as cockroaches. And he says that, to quote him, the youngsters are like cockroaches who don't get any employment and don't have any place in the profession. This is referring to lawyers and so on and so forth. But he made a very he gave a sweeping statement that caught up with the public. Some of them become media, and this is very important to see how the very people who were involved in the media were particularly from this very section that he's referring to as cockroaches. He says some of them become media, some of them become social media, some of them become RTI activists, some of them other activists, and then they start attacking everyone. So this is a statement that the CJI gives, and it's all over media by the evening of 15th of May. And on 17th of May, or I think it begins on 16th or 17th, somebody sitting in Boston, someone called Abhijit Dipke, a student sitting in Boston, he creates a page. You have AI, it's easy, you can just decorate the page. He took help from some of his other influencer friends. Abhijit Dipke had been in the communications department, if I'm not wrong, of the Aam Aadmi Party, the movement which led the people who led the Anna Hazare movement, the party which was born out of that movement. Dipke was in their PR or in the communications department. He was a student of public relations at the Boston University, I guess. And so he creates this page, and it starts circulating on Instagram. The the website starts circulating through some progressive Instagram influencers, you might say. They are the ones who start circulating it. And it grows. Like the first night, 25,000, the second night, 40,000 people join in, become members, or start following the page. Then it goes on to 80,000. Then suddenly, on the fifth day, it crosses about 8.9 million, which is the number of followers the Bharatiya Janta Party, the ruling dispensation, has on its Instagram page. So it crosses that by the fifth day, I think. And that is when Abhijit Dipke basically starts. And while this is going on, while the page is increasing, and this is, I'm telling this story because this is central to what shaped all of this in a way. So, and if you want to stop me somewhere, please go ahead if I'm not clear in my point. So this is where it begins, and you have on the 22nd, while all of this is going on. I'm sorry, I lost where I was going at. So while all of this was going on till the 22nd, the numbers were rising. You had a lot of people making memes and reels and so on and so forth, wearing dresses, dressing up as cockroaches, cleaning the city, reporting some damage somewhere on the roads and so on and so forth, potholes. So this is what they're broadcasting on social media. By the 22nd, Abhijit Dipke realizes that the movement can no longer be this humor and satire movement that can remain online, because he's also getting criticism. While the numbers are growing, there's nothing significant happening. All right. So Dipke then decides that he will return to India and that he will lead a protest to reform the education system. And the whole debate itself is going on the education system itself. And so he returns, I think, on the 6th of June and directly enters a protest site, which is out of bounds, or you have to take permission in order to protest. First, they refuse. They say that, it is our democratic right that we should be allowed to protest without seeking permission. We are going to be peaceful. We are going to be non-violent, and that is something that we will take care of, but we should be allowed to protest. But then the next day, on the 6th itself, they take permission from the police and they start a protest. and it ends by 5 o'clock. Few people show up, just about 5,000-6,000 people show up that day, max to max. That is the number that was reported. And after that, Ditya starts going from one city to another, uh, uh, leading these one-day protests, one-day protests that designated spaces. And then on the 20th of January, when the state, when the ruling dispensation is no longer willing to, is still not paying attention to them, but they're growing, and by now they've grown to about 22.6 million by the time that all of this was happening. So DK basically, and on the 20th of June, they come to Jantar Mantar once again. They seek permission and they start an illegal assembly after 5 o'clock, which is when they have to leave the site. They occupy the space and say, we will not leave until unless these demands are met, which is that the education minister must resign for uh, the the lapse in uh, conducting the NEET exams. So that is how it begins. That's where this story now starts.
Thanks. Thank you for laying that out. And I was curious also, you talked about sort of one side of this as being what maybe we can call it corruption, mismanagement, incompetence. But at the same time, there's also been this push towards privatization of India's education. So is that also a factor here? Do you think that's also contributed to this kind of structural crisis? And, if so, how?
Yeah, as I'm saying, the savings that a lot of middle class had is always invested in education, but they would usually do it in technical education, in the medical field, engineering, medical, and so on. That is where they did it. But now you see these private universities, public education was systematically, you know, destroyed by cutting down funds, by not taking care of these schools, both schools and higher education, uh, by uh, you know the workload management in these universities was very bad. You had teachers on contract, ad hoc teachers, not enough faculty, and then with the coming up of the national education policy, you had in these institutions you had of course the problems with the uh, there was several implementation gaps, and then they started diluting the core subjects. For example, you have this 4-year programs were introduced, under which you had this very strange credit system where core subjects were made flexible. You could take different subjects in different years. So this is something that is systematically, destroying focus on core subjects and so on. And then you also have uh, a rise in private universities. So you also have this. You have attacks on teachers in government universities, like lack of freedom. They're also leading to private universities. Because private universities are also paying better, and there is a complex web of things which is happening, because of which one could simply state that public education is being destroyed systematically, and there is a push for private education, even for private sector, and even public education. You would see there is a lot of public-private partnership happening. So you have to get funds from the outside in order to fund your own course, and this also significantly increases the amount of fees a student has to pay. And public education was supposed to be for the poor. Now the poor who were supposed to receive free public education, now they are forced to spend their savings. So this creates an economic crisis. It creates crisis for public sector education. You also have coming up of the coaching institutes. You have people being sold aspirations through coaching institutes, a very new industry that has come up. So these are all different. I hope I was able to answer what you were asking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that really gives a kind of holistic picture to it. So I want to now bring us to kind of like the present moment. So, I'm really curious to know how you feel about what's happened right now following the resignation of Pradhan. What's the mood on the ground like right now? You were someone who was actually physically at the protest. Of course, many of us watched the videos. We saw what the protest site was like, the atmosphere. So could you kind of describe that right now? Like, what was it like being there? And then, what does this moment mean for the movement, for the future of education?
Uh, I think in the contemporary movements that I've been in since at least the ones that I've witnessed since the 2011 India Against Corruption movement led by Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal and so on. This movement was very different, but it had elements from the movements that came before it. It had all the elements. The site, the occupation of the site is something that the Anna Hazare movement did. They sat at Jantar Mantar. They were the first ones. So Jantar Mantar was a place where even during the Congress rule, you must remember this, that this is not something that is happening only with the BJP. The Congress was equally trying to dismantle, uh, democratic rights and so on and so forth. They were equally culpable in all of this. So even then, you had to protest only 9 to 5. You weren't allowed to occupy that site. However, for a very long time, people sat at that place. And you have to remember that before that, you had people sitting right outside the parliament for a very long time. They would set up tents right outside the parliament. And before every session, MPs would go and listen to these people. So this was one particular kind of shift that had appeared, that you were not allowed space to even speak freely for as long as you wanted to. You did not have that space. That space had completely shrunk. Universities were systematically being, there was severe repression within universities where people spoke up generally. Especially JNU was one such example where you had where students are generally political, and then you had Jamia. You had all of this happening at this point of time. So they're taking up forms and elements from the movements that came before them. So the occupation of the site comes from the Anna Hazare movement. Then you have, uh, say, the kind of the kind of solidarity that we saw, what we call mutual aid within the anarchist lexicon, people sharing stuff without involving exchange. So you had the millennials sending in food and other supplies for people who were sitting there already, those who were occupying that space. There were some people who were coming there and feeding them every day because uh, they weren't able to feed themselves. They were protesting. And so, and this created, and this moment is also important because for the last 10, 12 years, uh, especially this generation who's protesting right now, one very interesting thing was in this movement was I did see a familiar face. Everybody was new, like not a familiar activist at this site, not one. It was a completely new set of people, and it was numbers. It wasn't like a few thousand people that you stumble across on a daily protest. So these numbers were staggering. And then the experiences that these people were describing were also transformative. For example, uh, we could call it, I mean, Marcuse has this term called the Eros effect, which his student George later on elaborates as this shift in consciousness where you begin to uh, go back to these primal ideas of justice and love and freedom. So this primal things awaken inside you. And then you have women describing how, for the first time in Delhi, in a public place, they felt safe despite the crowd. So, and after the protests are over, a lot of people from other states, even when the protests were going on, they were saying that they're missing out, that they're, the FOMO aspect of it. A lot of people traveled from different cities, especially for the 20th July march to the parliament. A lot of people flew in. I mean, you had people flowing in from Australia, flying from Mumbai, coming from different parts with trains without tickets. So this is something that was completely new, something that had not happened earlier. A completely new set of people, a completely new political awakening, and also a very different political grammar in which these people were dealing, a completely new political language, not your old left populist slogans. Something completely new was emerging out of this. And since Pradhan has resigned, things have gotten a little, there is, you're beginning to see fractures within the movement because a lot of people think that the demands, because after Dharmendra Pradhan's resignations, there were two other significant demands. One was 1 crore compensation for 21 students who have committed suicide, and the third one was that there will be no action, police action against people who participated in the protest. But uh, by now, a lot of information is circulating on social media where it is being claimed that, like, it's being reported that students are being rounded up and put in jail. So they've been charged with, I don't know, the illegal assembly or rioting and violence, because it has happened in a lot of places. Rioting and violence was something which is, if not central, it was an element within these protests. So they started picking up people, and by the latest news at 7 or 8, I saw somebody reporting on NDTV that Saurav Das, one of the chief spokespersons of the CJP, has said that if the government does not stick with the demands and the so if they're not, by tomorrow or day after, they will, by tomorrow, if the demands are not fulfilled, they will start protesting again. That is what they have said so far, but we are not sure. But internally, there is the movement seems that there is fracture. There are one on the side of the public and one on the side of criticizing CJP and saying how it lacks a coherent ideology and so on and so forth, and that they abandoned the people because a lot of people who had come from other states, they're poor young students, and they were left stranded on the street. They did not have money to go back, mobiles were stolen, and so you're seeing a slight bit of split here.
So what's your kind of reading of the situation in terms of where do you think this movement is going to go from here? Well, and I also want to hear from you if you agree with those criticisms, because I mean I've also heard the argument that they haven't really, the CJP hasn't really argued for like deeper kind of structural reforms, which they need to do. So, in your assessment, where do you think it's going, and what are your sort of hopes and fears about this, the movement?
Sorry, I'm interrupting. Could you give me a minute? I need to charge my phone, I think.
Sure, sure. Let me pause. Yeah.
I just put the.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was just asking you, Umesh, about what are you spoke about also the creation of a new political language. I think that's really interesting, and seems like a really positive shift. But yeah, what are your own kind of critiques or your hopes and fears about where this movement is going from here?
Uh, Look, from the start, this movement was not about structural changes. It was primarily a reformist movement. It had a very simple demand. And I think what led to its success was the fact that it had a very, very simple demand, that it had no coherent ideology, that the only reason that it gained the kind of following that it did was because all you had to do is to be able to get a joke about the ruling dispensation, to be able to participate in that joke in the manner in which you deemed fit by doing anything that you wanted to do. And so, in the past few years, a lot of repression had happened with prominent activists, with student leaders, with all those who participated in protest movements that came before this. Now, somebody, I mean, this was obviously a spontaneous combustion. There was no organization there, and people just came, and there is a saying in Hindi ki log judte gaye karwa banta gaya, which basically is that people kept joining and it started forming a caravan. So that is how it happened, and people would just come and voluntarily take up positions which they thought were positions uh, in the occupation side. They would volunteer for distributing food, bringing water, coordinating with people outside. All of this, this was all going on at the protest site. uh, I don't have a specific critique for this, because it was obvious that they were not making any utopian claims. It was very simple from the start. And what was also interesting is that even earlier, the kinds of movements that had very simple demands, what was unique basically about this was that earlier, every movement that sprung up was made out to be more than what it was. Like every political opposition or even the intelligentsia wanted to ride on the backs of every movement and overthrow the ruling dispensation. This is not something that anyone wanted this time. All they wanted was the resignation of the ruling party's education minister. That is what they wanted, of India's education minister. I'm sorry. So that is what they wanted. And it was a very, very clear demand. There was no, they did not divert at all. A lot of times you had external critiques that, you lack an ideology. Fine. They did not pay attention to any of these questions. A lot of times there were questions about them not raising issues about students like Umar Khalid. And those who talk about Umar Khalid obviously always forget Sharjeel Imam. It's a very interesting play going on there as well. People speaking up for Umar Khalid, but not speaking up for Sharjeel Imam at the same time, although they were both engaged in certain kind of civil disobedience and are undergoing punishment for it. Uh, so yeah, they were distracted with all of these demands. They were asked, they were forced a lot of times, and there was a lot of pressure. Social media is how social media operates. It's like you have so many. It's a cacophony of voices. You have people speaking over one another, everybody critiquing everybody. So they just stuck to their demands, and I think that was something uh, that has led to their victory, and it is something that I think personally movements should do. They should have a coherent goal, not an ideology does not win you anything. Ideology could possibly change a few people and bring them over to your side. You would have some committed activists, you would have some committed person who's now engaged in politics, but it does not bring people together. It's a connection between different ideologies, or it's the problem, it's the root cause that brings people together. And how you're going to uh, successfully make claims on state and capital and so on, that is what brings one together. So they had, even if they didn't have a plan, they were resilient about what they were doing. They did not leave. There were times when they could have left. There were times, even when the movement, it was going through these peaks and downfalls, and they could have left. A lot of people would have left. And only people who've actually participated or led movements can understand when you start feeling frustrated. So you had rains, and this is hot summer in Delhi. You had kids lying on the streets, on the road, literally on the road, without any protection. There are no fans, nothing. And it's impossible to survive in Delhi, even at night, without an air conditioner inside your room. So it was this. And then Wangchuk's, entry itself was another factor, and his resilience, him sitting for 18 days. And on the 19th day, him being picked up. So, yeah, also this event on the 19th was very important, because if this kind of repression had not happened, people would not have gathered on the evening of the 19th at Jantar Mantar, and the kind of crowds that you witnessed on the march to the parliament on the 20th of July. That was something that happened because on the morning of 9th, you had police in plain clothes coming to the site and taking Sonam Wangchuk away. That is something that basically escalated the movement to where it went on the 20th. And then the police violence that was, and the manner in which a lot of influencers covered, like all of this violence being recorded, being circulated online, and um, you had public opinion shift overnight. Parents who were supporting the ruling dispensation or have voted for it, they seeing that the kids are being beaten up, probably softened up and started thinking about their own children rather than those in power. So this happened. I don't know what the future of this movement is. I don't know. But what it has certainly made sure is that people are now not afraid to come out in public. That whenever they would need accountability, or at every instance where they would see a wrong, they will call it out. And they will call it out in various ways. They will call it out through Instagram. They might, you know, turn to the streets. They might just do it in a language only they understand, but they will do it. That is
And
what
you
the,
know,
as one journalist said, uh, rephrasing the old Afzal Guru thing, हर घर से कितने अफजल मारोगे, हर घर से अफजल निकलेगा. He says, अब हर घर से cockroach निकलेगा. So you have a cockroach coming out of every house. Although this is an overestimation of what is going on, but it's an interesting way to put it, that you would probably have a dissent. And there was another journalist who put it beautifully, that you have these youngsters rebelling not only against injustice, against the state, against the ruling dispensation, but also against their own families. The parents who are staunch supporters of the ruling dispensation, and also against the legacy media that is, has been at the forefront and center of spreading lies and misinformation for a very long time. Yeah, so that is
yeah, and
something that I'm hopeful of. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, I don't feel like that genie will can go back into the bottle once that people's ability to express themselves, the freedom to dissent, to make jokes, to, there was so much humor and ridicule. A lot of people have been talking about that as a really powerful tactic of kind of being able to bring people together.
Yeah, yeah. Mm,
That can't go back in the bottle once it's out.
exactly.
Um, so Umesh, yeah, I wanted to also ask you, there was a question from one of our faculty as well about, I mean, it's very interesting that this movement in a way started in the diaspora in the sense that, Abhijit is in Boston and so,
Yeah.
but the question was sort of, what do you think students or faculty in the diaspora can do to support social movements that are happening in India? Should they have a role? I mean, can they have a positive role? What would you say about that?
That's an interesting question. Like this question of how movements can be linked transnationally via the diaspora, or by connecting various movements and activists on the ground, has always been a very difficult question to answer, and we have not been able to find a proper answer to this. Honestly speaking, I'm not aware of any interesting take on this so far. But and it's also a in the present conjuncture where it's I mean, students who are in India, they've been threatened with their passports being cancelled. There are several gag orders, and we've seen in the past that people, also the diaspora, especially people in the intelligentsia, are being targeted for uh, speaking up for certain movements, or speaking up uh, against injustice in their own country. So all of this is going on, and I think the only way to for uh, people in the academia or in the diaspora to do this is just by amplifying the voices. I think that is all that we can do to amplify it, to uh, spread the word, to let more people hear about it. I think that's the only way that can be done. I'm not sure what the ruling dispensation would do if we start receiving funds from other countries, because that has been a very uh, important point of contention. The movement, the way it was sustained by a lot of people's voluntarily funding the movement, as in sending food and all of this to the site, all the necessary uh, things important to sustain yourself or reproduce yourself every day was sent out by people, and it was being claimed that all the funds are coming from rooted from other countries, or these are they're funded by foreigners. So I don't know how all of that would play out, but I think it's we can simply amplify the voices, and that is all anyone can do, even us. We can't do anything other than that.
And I think the other thing you're saying, which is really important, is the interlinking of these issues, right? Because the crisis of higher education is certainly not particular to India. The US has been also eroding its public education system. The University of California has the largest public education system in the world, and we're seeing some of the same kind of structural forces that students in India have been dealing with, and the same response to protest, shutting down dissent. These are things that are happening beyond like national borders. So I think that point about also understanding their interlinkages is really important. So Umesh, maybe last question for you. So, you kind of alluded to this a little bit in terms of, we don't know where the movement is gonna go from here, but what would you like people who are sitting far away from Delhi, far away from these protests, what would you like them to kind of understand about what's happened, why this has been? Because it does feel like, although, we're probably not going to get sweeping education reform, it does feel like there's been an earthquake. It does feel like we're not going back to what things were like before. So, can you speak a little bit about that? Like, what has this moment meant to you personally as a student activist? And, how do you look at it historically as well?
Uh, yeah, as you were saying, I kind of in the beginning itself pointed to certain things that were happening, or how it has been a very historically significant moment. Uh, I think one of the things that we need to understand is movements today are going to take place on the cultural front, and also on social media. It's going to be through social networks. This is one of the first lessons that anybody who's interested in this or trying to understand what is going on or how did all of this happen is to understand that people have discovered one another through many to many communication through social media. And even though there were a lot of doubts about how social media might be a constraining force, despite it being a major plank for movements that began in 2011, the whole cycle of contention, this is part of that very cycle of contention. A very different kind of movement ecology is coming up, which is different from the kind of movements that happened before this. That all of uh, yes, as you're saying, there's you can't put the genie back into the bottle. So that is what has happened, that this is a completely different form of contention that is emerging. And anybody who sees uh, violence on the streets, the so one very interesting thing that happened, and it's important to talk about that. I'm sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but that is about how people discovered what police's role within maintaining law and order is from this protest. Because earlier a lot of people had this idea that police was meant for public security, for the safety of the public, and that when protesters went out, uh, the kind of response or repression that police engaged in was justified, because these protesters were somehow trying to um, um, disturb law and order situation. But this time, a lot of ordinary students who were not connected to activism in any way have discovered that the police's role actually is entirely, it's something else. The police does not protect you. It is the kindness of the strangers. It is strangers who are protecting you. It is women who are standing in front of police officers when they're hitting the men. And so this is something that they have discovered this time. So I mean, these are the questions, or the implications that this movement has had is, one, you need to take social media seriously, and also one also needs to go away from this idea that this is some specific cultural moment, or the language of Gen Z. I mean, this whole notion that this is a Gen Z movement and it is somehow a cultural moment. It is not. Like, Gen Z is not simply an age cohort which has a specific cultural milieu. It also has a specific political, economic, and social milieu, which is what differentiates it from the boomers and the millennials. That is what is important. It's not just culture. It's not just a cultural phenomena, and it's not just the Gen Z. If you look at this movement, you had a lot of working class participation from all sectors. And these were the ones who were basically on the front lines of the movement, who weren't scared of the police beatings, who weren't scared that the police might kill them, because they're already living in a condition which is, extremely precarious. So being beaten up, or taking a being shot in the chest, is, they've overcome that fear. So yeah, I mean, we have to see this movement as being a very stark break from whatever kind of movements that came before this, whether it is about how people mobilize, whether it is about the kind of language they use in protests, the kind of slogans they use in protests, or the kind of voluntary activity that people engage in, or how they confront the police. I think these are all significant learnings that will shape the movements to come. And this is something that I have gathered so far. But
That's so fast. Yeah, really, really interesting. Um, Thank you so much. I think that was really wonderful. Gave us like a really wonderful picture of what's happening, analyzing the different elements, connecting it to the past, but also really thinking about this as a movement where something new is emerging. There's a kind of emergent. I'm also thinking about the tone of the movement is so different, right? It's not this somber and earnest and serious. It's also shifted I mean, I think that's what you were also talking about with the political language. So it's really fascinating. Thank you so much, Umesh, for your time and for sharing all your insights with us. Is there anything you'd like to add?
no, I mean, there's nothing that I would like to add to this. You've, I think, summarized it well. I mean, I was all over the place maybe, but you've tied it together so
You
that
were
there
wonderful.
is.
I think it was really insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saiba. Thank you.
I'm gonna just stop.